Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I just want to start off this video by saying thank you so much for subscribing. I think the last time I checked I had about 60 subscribers, which might not seem like a lot, but it's really cool to see that people actually are enjoying my videos and they're finding them helpful. So hopefully I can continue to give you some helpful tips for law school, and thank you again for subscribing and for watching my videos. So today's video is going to be about the Lsat. So if you don't know, the Lsat is the law school admissions test. It is the test that if you are going to a Canadian law school, you have to take in order to get into law school. I don't know how it is in other places. I know there are some places that you don't have to take the Lsat, but for Canadian law schools, you do. That's always fun. So the Lsat is basically a test to see if you have the skills to be successful in law school. It's not a test about the law. It's not going to ask you any legal questions. Your studying for the Lsat is to train you to think like a lawyer, to think in a certain way, which is probably very different than the way that you normally think about things, and that will help the people who decide whether or not you're going to be admitted to law school to see if you will do well. So that's a little bit about the Lsat. So for taking the Lsat, you can do courses online, and I think you can also take courses in person. My hometown did not offer, it was kind of a smaller city, so it doesn't offer in-person courses, and I didn't want to take one online because they're like $1,000 or $2,000. Like, to me that is so expensive. I'm trying to save money for law school, not spend it. So I decided to self-study. I was worried that I was not going to be at the same level as the people who were taking the courses, but I did okay. I got into law school, so just know that you don't have to take the course. You don't have to spend the money if you don't want to, as long as you're willing to put in the effort to teach yourself everything, which is a lot of work, so just know that. So in order to prepare for the Lsat, my number one biggest tip, that if you've done any research on the Lsat, you've probably seen this and heard this already, it's do practice questions. Nothing will prepare you better than doing practice questions. So buy old Lsats, just get your hands on old tests so you can do the practice questions. Do whatever you have to do, because, well, don't do whatever you have to do. Remember that you're trying to get into law school, so don't do something illegal, but do whatever legal things you have to do to get your hands on the test. They're pretty cheap if you buy them, and they're 100% worth it if you are trying to get into law school and you want to do well on the Lsat. So definitely find a way or invest in old practice tests, because they're so helpful for you, and you really can't redo them. I used to try to do that, but you can't redo them because you remember the answers, so you have to have new ones constantly. And there's tons out there. There's so many that you will not run out of tests to do. So definitely, that's my biggest tip. Make sure you have practice questions to do and old tests. So I bought a couple of things. So I bought some of those tests. I also bought this book. There was a glare. The official Lsat Handbook. I don't know how helpful this book really was for me. It basically just explains the Lsat, and it explains different kinds of questions that you're going to approach and how to deal with them. Like here, a guide to analytical reasoning questions. See, you can see I highlighted a little bit of it, but I really didn't use this book very much. Oh, and it's also falling apart, so that's fun. It was okay. I did use it a little bit, but it was not the most helpful to me. I don't know if I would recommend buying this, just because I didn't use it enough to really recommend it, but to me anything helps. So, and I do recall using it at least once, so it might be something you want to invest in. But there's that book. The other book that I bought, which is like the holy grail for Lsat preparation books, is this here. I have to like turn it because there's like a weird glare. Oh, there we go. Lsat Clarity. It's a huge book. If you can see, I still have my sticky notes in it. It's gigantic, but it is amazing. It's called the First Complete Lsat Self-Study Guide. It just tells you basically everything you need to know. The only thing I didn't like about it, because I'm super particular, is there were a lot of typos in it. which really got on my nerves. But other than that, it was like just an amazing book. It basically gives you everything that you need. So there's a section in here, I even have a sticky note on it called schedule. So it gives you a schedule, like methods, phase, schedules. So it tells you, if you can see that, it gives you an example schedule for how to study for different things. So this one says there's 33 sessions and they're 2 hours per session. So it tells you what to read, what pages, about how long it should take you, and then gives you time to do practice questions. So it's just perfect, and it also helps you build your own schedule. It was just a really, really awesome book. I read the whole thing. It's all highlighted. It's fantastic. You have to get this book. I really recommend it. There might be a better one now. I did the LSAT a couple years ago, but I really recommend getting this book, unless there is a better one, because it was fantastic. It also teaches you about diagramming, which is really helpful, especially for the games section. So I don't really remember that much because it was a couple years ago, but for something like a conditional, if you don't know, is like, if this happens, then this happens. So this book will teach you, like, that one is simple because it's just arrows, but it teaches you how to diagram things. So especially for the games, it's really helpful to learn how to diagram things, because it gets jumbled in your head. You can't possibly just sit there and think about it. You have to actually draw things out, and drawing is easier than writing it out, so you're not constantly reading over the same things again, because that takes too long, because the LSAT is timed. So diagrams are super quick, they're really easy to draw, and they're really easy to read once you've drawn it, to help you figure out the answer to the question. So this book is really good for teaching you how to diagram. There's also like little reviews. So here there's a core deductions review and then some practice questions. And then the other thing about this book is it is tied to past LSAT pre-tests. So let's see if I can find a page in here. It kind of requires you, oh here we go, to have certain tests. So this one here, see, assumption problem sets. So these are all questions, so these are tests. So this here is number 19 is the pre-test number. So you have to have those tests in order to answer these questions. So this is pre-test 19 section 2, and then it gives you the questions that you can do to practice your assumptions in this case. And then it gives you average ones, difficult ones, and very difficult ones. So it literally breaks down everything for you. But you do have to have the other practice tests in order to do it. If I haven't said it enough, get this book. Really, it will be so helpful for you. The other thing about the LSATs, I don't know if I mentioned this, is it's scored out of 180. So 180 is the absolute top score you can get. Well, I think if you get something below 150, you're not in great shape. But who knows. The other thing I would recommend doing before you get any, well, you could get the books, but before you actually start studying, I think this book actually recommended it, is to do a diagnostic test. Just get your hands on one of the pre-tests and do it before you start studying. So just see what level you're at before you start, because then you can kind of measure your progress a little bit better. I think when I did my first pre-test, or when I did the diagnostic test, I was at about a 140 or 141, which is not great. So I had a lot of work to do, but it's a different way of thinking, so it's not really expected that before you start you're going to already know how to think this way. It's not the average way that people think about things, so it's okay if you start out low. It just means, you know, you can, the only way to go is up. So just keep that in mind when you're studying, but do a diagnostic test to see what level you're at, so that you know at least where you start off. Maybe you start off at a 150 already, like that's awesome, then you can just keep moving up from there. So just do that before, so that you can kind of see where you're at. The other thing I would say is don't get discouraged. When I was studying, so I studied for about 5.5 months, and closer to the end of my studying, like I had been going up, I'd been getting better and better scores, and then towards the end of my studying I started to get worse scores, so my progress kind of went backwards, you know, and I started to get nervous, because I'm like, oh my god, like I'm shooting for this score but I'm just going backwards now. I'm not getting any better. What am I going to do? And I think part of it is you know, it could just be that I had studied myself out. You know, when you're studying for an exam or something and you just studied so much that nothing else is getting in and you start to forget things. And it's not that you don't know it, it's just you've just been doing it for too long. So it's time for a break. And the other thing I think too is it's just nerves. It was getting closer to the time that I had to write the LSAT. So, you know, you're getting nervous about it and you're worried that you're not going to get the score that you want. So then you kind of start like going backwards. So just don't get discouraged. Just keep going, keep practicing, and keep going until you kind of are getting like a similar score every time, I think. That's a good indication of where you'll be at. And remember that it's possible that your score will go down a little bit when you actually do the test because you're going to be nervous. So shoot for a high score, and it's very possible you'll get it, but it might go down a couple points, which is not a big deal. But just practice as much as you can. Give yourself enough time. I know people who give themselves like a month or 2 months to study and it was not nearly enough. And the last thing you want to do is have to do the LSAT again. So make sure you give yourself enough time to study so that you don't have to do it again. And the other thing I would say is with regard to doing practice tests, maybe not at the beginning of your studying, but towards the end or middle to end of your studying, do practice questions or practice tests under the same environment or the same conditions that you would be doing the LSAT. So time yourself. I think you have 35 minutes per section, I think it is, if I'm not mistaken. Is it? I can't remember. I think it is. Whatever it is, set a timer for that time and do the test as if you were doing it on the day that you are going to be writing your actual LSAT. Because timing is half the battle with the LSAT, so you're always going to be working against the clock, so make sure you're timing yourself to make sure that you can do it on time. Knowing the answers means absolutely nothing if you can't get it down in time, so really prepare yourself and time yourself to know that you can get it done in that time. So yeah, and if I didn't mention this already, I know the LSAT is offered 4 times a year, so it's like end of September, beginning of October, December, February, and June. So let's say I was trying to get into law school to start September 2017 and I wanted to do the LSAT. A lot of schools will only accept the September, October, and December LSATs of this year. So the one that you can do in February or in June would be too late. And it's not that like that for every school, but some of them are. When you're applying to law school, you want them to have all of your information as soon as possible. So I think the deadline is about November 1st for applications, so you really want them to have your LSAT score as soon as possible. So try and do the one, I would recommend trying to do the one for, like if you're trying to get in for next September, do the one in September, this September coming up, which if you're starting to study now, oh Lord, that's scary. Or the one in December. If you're doing it really ahead of time, like a couple years ahead of time, then do whatever the heck you want. I mean, and you can do whatever the heck you want anyway, it really doesn't matter. But I just know that a lot of schools don't accept the later ones, the scores from the later ones, because it's just too late by then. So try and do the earlier ones. And the other benefit of doing the earlier one is that if you don't get the score that you want, you have time to do it again. So I did the one, mine was at the end of September, and I did it at that time because then I thought if my score's not good enough, I can do it in December again and still be able to get in for next year. So you have to kind of really think ahead. Anything in law school, really, you have to think ahead. You always have to be one step ahead of everything, but especially with the LSAT too. So make sure you are timing it out properly and thinking ahead and getting the test done when you need it to be done in order to get in for the year that you want. So yeah, I think that's all of my advice that I can give you about doing the LSAT. If you take away anything from this video, it is do tons and tons of practice questions, especially under timed conditions, and give yourself enough time to study because you don't want to have to do it again. And keep encouraging yourself, don't get discouraged, and just keep going. It's hard. The LSAT is hard. It's designed to teach you to think in a completely different way, so it's a challenge, and don't feel discouraged if you don't naturally think that way. I don't think most people do. But you can train yourself to think that way. So just keep going, keep studying. So that is it. That's all of my advice on doing the LSAT. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more videos about law school. and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!